My name is Ståle Hansen. I'm a Microsoft Most Valuable Professional and I work at Cloudway. With me today, I have Jan Ketil Skanke, who is also an MVP and work at Cloudway. We were involved recently in a project where we were deploying 1,500 Teams rooms, and we want to share with you how we did it. When we finished the project, we saw that there were two factors for success, and I'm going to share those with you right now. Number one was plan and validate. Yes, plan the network and validate that the configuration is what we need. And the second one was manage and deploy with confidence. Make sure that we're able to detect the issues, and make sure that when we deploy them, that we deploy them the same way every time. I'm going to talk today about Teams rooms on Windows. And the reason for why we chose that for this project was, at the time, Teams rooms on Android, which previously were called collaboration bars, they were not sufficient because they needed dual screens and they wanted to use external peripherals, which collaboration bars and Teams rooms on Android did not have at the time. If you wonder what kind of Teams room works for your environment and your spaces, go to aka.ms/teamspaces. There, Microsoft will recommend what kind of equipment works for you in your different environments. Small, medium, large rooms, on the go, the huddle space, and so on and so forth. Let's look at where we started. We started with a Sky for Business deployment because we were migrating to Microsoft Teams, and they wanted to use Teams rooms to have a good meeting experience for when they moved to Microsoft Teams. They had link-based and Skype-based meeting rooms already that were connected to the Sky for Business server. They have already set up Sky for Business Hybrid, so that's a requirement when you're going to do this, and they had already done that. So moving the user to the cloud is a requirement because we're going to use Microsoft Teams, which is in the cloud, it turns out. And that meeting room, that preferably the Exchange account as well, should be moved to online. And at least it needs to be moved to Sky for Business online so that you get the Teams capabilities as well. As you see in the drawing, you see that now we also have a connection to the cloud. And I'm going to spend some time on how we validated that connection to the cloud. And we want this to be connected as directly as possible because Teams is a cloud service. Before we migrated the user though, we needed to give the user a license. And the proper license to give these users is the Teams meeting room license. And you have two types of licenses for that. You have standard and then you have premium. What's the difference between these two? Well, the standard one is the one that gives you the licenses you need in the cloud, like Intune, Teams, Sky for Business, and so on. The premium license adds an extra factor where Microsoft actually manages your rooms. So you don't need to look at them, you don't need to create alarms for them yourself. This is of course a premium service and has some extra costs added to it. They will not help you with the deployment, so you need to take care of the deployment, but they will help you managing, upgrading, troubleshooting the room once it's up. Next was the network factors. Principle number one is that you need to have a local internet breakout or as close as possible, because the main principle for moving to the cloud and using Microsoft Teams is that you want to go directly to the cloud, and we want to use GeoDNS, so we go out locally. Especially if you have a global environment, you don't want to break out in Europe if your meeting rooms are based in the US, for instance. And this is a general principle for connecting to Microsoft Teams. Even though it's on the computer or other devices, we want them to break out locally. How can we measure this? And this is where connectivityoffice.com helps us a lot. I recommend you to use this tool and run it from wherever you have users and meeting rooms. What it shows us is the network quality connecting from that location. It tells you if there are any proxy servers, if there is any deep packet inspection, also what kind of route it takes, and how many hops it is if you do trace route. It will do all this for you, and connectivityoffice.com is the way moving forward for validating the network. What we're looking for here, which is team specific, is the media connectivity, that it connects and works for audio, video, and desktop sharing. And then we're looking at packet loss, latency, and jitter. And we have some values that we're looking for as well. For instance, packet loss should be below 1%, especially if it's on a wired network, and all Teams rooms should be on a wired network. Next, we're looking at jitter and latency. And the one in the middle here is the latency, which should be below 100 milliseconds, especially from a managed location where the meeting rooms are located. And the last one here is jitter, where we'll want that to be below 30 milliseconds. So what's the difference between these metrics, you ask? Well, packet loss, of course, is where your network starts dropping packets and you disconnect, worst case. The next one is latency, which is the delay between the sending and receiving of packets. If that goes over 200 milliseconds or even 300 milliseconds, you will feel like you're talking in a walkie-talkie. That's what we want to avoid. And the last one here is jitter, is where the packets on the network, if they take different routes, they will come and arrive to the destination in different order. And if you have a much jitter, and that means that you are having a network that may be overloaded, so that the packets get routed different routes. We use Network Planner, and I recommend that you also use Network Planner to categorize the location, the bandwidth, the number of users, and also number of Teams rooms. Because the Teams rooms, they probably run on a higher bitrate than your regular client, because you maybe run video in full screen and so on and so forth. So adding the meeting rooms in the location as well gives you a good way to plan your network. Make sure there are no obvious issues with the network or scalability issues. My colleague Alexander, who is also an MVP and works at Cloudway, he created a script for this because he had to categorize over 200 sites, and we spent a lot of time on this. So he wrote a blog post where you can find on alexholmeset.blog that you can create an Excel spreadsheet and then upload that into the planner. So you create that spreadsheet, which you can reuse for both adding it for analytics and for call quality dashboard as well. So by using PowerShell, you are able then to automatically upload these sites. And you also get the dependencies, because sometimes you have centralized breakout in the region, so you can add those dependencies as well. This is really useful and will save you a lot of time. This is just to plan with confidence, to make sure that you have thought of and captured all the obvious issues, or that we should have enough bandwidth. So if you don't have enough bandwidth, it could be other issues and not Teams that is causing the bandwidth to be underutilized. Also, this plays into the call quality dashboard as well. You can use the same spreadsheet for that, because what's important when you are deploying Teams is that you can identify if there is an internal device or an external unmanaged device. That's where we need to upload our subnets and sites. So you can use the same method to create that spreadsheet as well. Great stuff. Next is that we want to move the user over to Teams and make it the user Teams only mode, because in this space we're actually moving to using Teams meetings, and the Teams user, when it's flipped to Teams only mode, can still join Skype for Business meetings. As you see in the drawing here, if you are invited to a meeting by a on-prem Skype for Business user, that meeting room needs to have connectivity and be able to join locally that Skype for Business server. That tells us two things. We need to trust the computer and the certificate, and we need to trust the certificate authority that resides on the internal Skype for Business. And also you see that we have a domain joined computer here. And that's a typical way to deploy it back in the days when you only had on-premises accounts. But there are issues by domain joining the Teams room. Typical issues is patching. It could be group policy issues, that you get group policies that breaks the Teams room. So it brings more pain than it brings advantages of managing it. What we want to do is make it a cloud device. Turns out that all the services we are accessing and logging onto are in the cloud, even the Skype for Business component. So make sure that you're using cloud device, and Jan Ketil is going to walk you through what we mean about that, using Intune to manage them, joining them to Azure Active Directory, and so on and so forth. What you see though, when we are able to remove this Skype for Business environment, when we have finished migrating, then we actually only need the devices to connect to the internet. What we asked for was that we asked for a different VLAN that had a different IP address when connecting to Microsoft 365. And the reason for why we asked about that is that we can then remove multi-factor authentication, or say that, hey, if you come from this IP range, then you are already compliant. That was the best practice. That's not what we ended up with though. We ended up with putting it on the internal network and then whitelisting the IP ranges that were on that internal network, which is the next best thing. But if you are able to put them on a different VLAN with a different internet breakout and a different public IP address, that is the preferred way. And then have them as a pure cloud device and monitor them and administer them in Microsoft 365. Jan Ketil will tell you though that in order to deploy these devices, we do need to have access to the local network in some way as well, because the deployment server is on premises. That's how we can actually deploy the hardware. But the moment it's finished deploying, it's only a cloud only device. When Skype for Business is going away though, July 31st, you will still be able to join Skype for Business meetings, but you won't be able to put your devices in Skype mode, but you can still join them from the Teams room system. And look at this as well, the DNS, because as long as you have a hybrid running, DNS is on premises. The moment you're removing hybrid, DNS points online. What kind of DNS am I talking about here? I'm talking about Link Discover, I'm talking about zip.domain.com, I'm talking about Zip Federation TLS. Those are the Skype for Business DNS records I'm talking about, because there is a Skype for Business component on the Teams room, and typically if you get the message where you cannot sign into the Skype for Business components, that's typically a DNS issue. Make sure the device can resolve the public IP addresses and DNS records for Skype for Business Online. Let's talk about Zoom and WebEx as well, because the Teams room on Windows are able to use guest join. How does that work really? Well, the point is that you should be able to be invited to a Zoom call, invited to a WebEx meeting, and then be able to join those. What happens though is that it is a client installed on the device, which is in the backend, but it will recognize what kind of device it is and kind of meeting invite it is, and then be able to join that meeting. There are some caveats though, because typically you want to do this when you are invited by external people. So maybe you get a meeting invite and you forward that to the meeting room because you want to have the meeting in that meeting room. What may happen by default is that that meeting does not arrive at the Teams room. And the problem with that is the Exchange calendar processing, which is automatically and by default blocking external meeting messages. What you need to do though for those meeting rooms is to enable external meeting messages so that it can actually receive and be booked by external resources. And the reason for this is the moment you forward a meeting, that is when you tell the organizer, hey, can you invite this person too? And then you will get invited to that. There's one more caveat here though. It is safe links. Safe links, if you're using Microsoft Defender for Office 365, you have safe links, and that will rewrite external emails, especially the Teams meeting link, which means that the Teams room will not recognize what kind of meeting it is. So you may want to add a do not rewrite teamsmicrosoft.com address as an exception in safe links. And you may need to do the same for Zoom links and WebEx links. So this shows you what you need to do and the format you need to have it in, https teams.microsoft.com/start. That is what the Teams invitation starts with and the meeting. After you have added this, safe links will not rewrite this, and you add then your Teams rooms as a user for this rule. When you've done those two things, external invitations will work as well. That was what I wanted to talk about, planning and making sure that we validate the connectivity. I talked about the using the network planner, using connectivityoffice.com, making sure the account have the proper license, making sure that we're able to use guest join if you want to do that. And plan and validate, people. Make sure you do that. Now we're going to talk about how to deploy and manage with confidence. So I give over the word to Jan Ketil. Take it away.
Thank you, Ståle. And let's jump straight into the deployment stuff. So let's start with the requirements from the customer. First thing was it has to have global scalability. So they were able to simply deploy the meeting rooms in any of their offshore, onshore, and global locations. The next thing was they had to have it fully automated. So it had to be in a way that any IT personnel from any location could simply just press F12 and just deploy the meeting room by selecting the right room and just let the process take care of the rest. So the deployment setup is based on Configuration Manager. We're using Configuration Manager to deploy the meeting room. So we deploy Windows, we deploy the meeting room, and the deployment process enrolls the meeting room into Intune. We are basing it on the Microsoft toolkit for deploying meeting rooms that you can find on Docs, but we had to do some customization both for scale, automation, and stability. So actually we built a custom room selector UI. So if you have a look here, so when you go into any room and you want to redeploy or deploy a new room, first thing you have to do is you have to choose a country. So is it Norway? Is it Sweden? Is it US? So you just select the country. And then you select the location, which is then of course filtered by the country. So we're selecting the city and then we can select the room that we are actually deploying. This, you can see here, we have a room name and a device name. So the room name itself is typically the name of the actual room. So when we have this set, everything in the backend is now dynamically configured with the resource account, the device naming, and even the password for the meeting room itself, so it can log on. This is the password is stored inside a KeyPass database that we have built into this deployment process. So it's all in this task sequence that we are deploying to deploy the meeting rooms. So the first thing you can see is we have set variable KeyPass. This is actually where we set the actual logon name to the KeyPass database, so that we can dynamically pick the right room, resource account, and password at the next stage. So let's look at the actual deployment. So let me walk you through this. So the first thing is we press F12 and we boot the machine. So as I showed you earlier, we're selecting the country, we're selecting the city, and then we can see here on the right side that the information pops up. So now when we click on deploy meeting room, the process moves forward. So the first thing, of course, we have to install Windows. So the task sequence deploys Windows down to the device. And of course, this is a bit speed up because we don't want to wait for 50 minutes for this to finish. And the next thing, there is a few reboots. We do install a configuration manager agent, we remove some built-in apps, and then we dump down the meeting room based on the meeting room toolkit. So the last step is where we actually remove configuration manager and enroll the device into Intune. In this stage, we are enrolling it with a bulk token. So the first logon is by the administrator, the local administrator with a known password that is provisioning the actual room. So what's going on in the background, you see some reds, but it doesn't really matter. This is Microsoft scripts that deploys the actual room. We had to do some customization to avoid any unexpected reboot at this stage, but when we could control that, you see the Skype account logs on, it's still called Skype, and then we see the meeting room is starting to start up for the first time. So up until this stage, it's been zero touch after we selected the room. So now it goes forward, and it's still a few reboots that needs to happen. But this is after the task sequence. This is the room provisioning from Microsoft that happens on the actual device at this moment. So if you give it a few seconds, we will see that the meeting room is starting up. And the meeting room is logged on. I see, all right, it's already a few meetings. It's signing in. It's got its calendar already. And now it's ready to join the meeting. So typically this takes about 45 to 55 minutes based on our experience. So now we can just go in, click join, and join the meeting. So as you see here, we are in the meeting now. And of course, there is nobody else in the meeting. So let's just hang up and say that the quality of the meeting was great. So let's just hang up and say that the quality of the meeting was great. So now this is the full deployment of the room. It's fully zero touch, fully automated from end to end. And all we have to do is to actually select the room in that meeting room UI. So what it does, it auto configures the full meeting room. It enrolls it into Azure AD and Intune automatically, and it's ready for the next meeting within 60 minutes. I think that's pretty great. I think that is pretty great. So why Intune, you might ask? Don't we have the Teams admin center now to manage the meeting rooms? Well, yeah, we do. Of course, we already defined the meeting rooms as cloud devices, and we needed a way to manage the device itself in addition to manage the meeting room in Teams. So Intune gives us manageability outside of Teams, so we can manage Windows. It means we can manage Defender, we can manage BitLocker, we can do delivery optimization for the patching. And of course, there is also need sometimes for third-party software. Let's say you have a Logitech Rally in your room. So you want to deploy the Logitech Rally sync software so you can monitor the Logitech equipment. Yeah, we can just deploy that then through Intune. We can do custom configuration with scripts. We can do proactive remediations to maintain health. We've actually used this to maintain the BIOS level on the HP meeting rooms at one customer site. And also, a good thing, if you really want to have a way to simply change the theme, so the background picture on all your meeting rooms, because you want to do an internal campaign, you can also use proactive remediations together with some Azure Blob, where you can fetch the files to actually fully just switch the theming on all rooms overnight. This is something we can do with custom theming and Intune. Another thing as to why we used Intune is that in this case, the customer wanted to maintain and control the version of the meeting room itself. So with the native setup, you have only one option, and that is allow the store to update the meeting room whenever a new version comes out. But you know, with 1,500 rooms, and maybe you don't want to trust that every release is stable and good. So we stopped and blocked automatic updates of the meeting rooms from the store. And then we actually deploy the version that we have tested out to the rooms through Intune. That also controls the Windows version, because with the deployment of the meeting room, that controls what version of Windows is offered down to the device from Windows Update. When it comes to Windows Update, that's actually something we allow the room to handle itself. We don't do any kind of update policies from Intune. So it's not configured, it just gets the latest patches from Microsoft and it checks it every night at the scheduled reboot. But with the meeting room version control, we can decide when we want to move from the current version to the next version of Windows based on what kind of version the meeting room itself has. And Azure Monitor. So why do we need Azure Monitor? Again, we have the Teams Admin Center, or do we? So there is no alerting today in the Teams Admin Center. With Azure Monitor, we can build our own alerts. We can build custom log collection to gather more data. We, for example, have been using this to fetch logs from Logitech, so we can actually build alerting around the Rally system as well. And of course, you can build workbooks, so you can have easy way to see what's the status of your environment right now. So, workbooks. So within the workbooks, we can build our own reports and queries to build out graphics to show how the environment looks at right now. So for instance, here I have something that monitors the different versions of the Teams meeting room application. I have a monitoring for blue screens, so you can monitor if you have certain devices that keeps on going, having blue screen issues, then you can dig deeper into that. And also we have information about any hardware error or application error that happens on the devices. And this same information we can use to build alerting. So for instance, here we have a native hardware check that checks, it actually queries log analytics, and based on that query, it will create alerts if you have issues with a room. Let's say the camera is not connected, or the room display is not working as it should. That will create alert in log analytics, and you can then forward this alert to email, SMS, or maybe even ServiceNow or some other incident handling system. So what about the Teams Admin Center? So the Teams Admin Center, it's great that it's coming. It does have some capabilities today. So you can change some config. You can change the meeting configuration, like automatic screen share, third-party meetings. You can change the peripherals configuration, whether or not you have a room with dual monitor or not. Proximity join can be turned on and off. And you can also switch between custom theming and a built-in theme if you want to. And you can also use these to diagnostics. So you can check your health is everything connected, and you can download some device logs that's Teams focused, and then you can do a restart. You can also actually, I forgot to say that, but you can also collect logs from Intune the same way, collect device logs, but that will be focused on Windows and Intune. So with the Teams Admin Center and Intune together, you can gather both the Intune related logs, the Windows related logs, and the Teams related logs by using those two tools together. So back to the original story. So first, of course, we need to plan and validate. So we spent some time in the lab creating that task sequence to be bulletproof, to work every time. And we needed to plan out the networking and everything else, like Ståle has already talked a lot about. And we have deploy and manage with confidence. We know that the devices has been deployed correctly. We know they are up to date. We know if they are having issues. And all of this is by using these two tools together. So that's the two success factors we need to successfully deploy the meeting rooms at scale. So with that, I'm just going to say thank you, and watch out in the after talk from the studio, where you will see some more discussions around this. Thank you.
Välkomna tillbaka in i studion. Hoppas ni hade mycket nöje under sessionen om de här MTR-rummen. Som ni ser står jag helt ensam i studion nu, men med mig på länk har jag Jan Ketil Skanke och Ståle Hansen som ni såg i sessionen här innan. Ni rullar ut de här stor mängd Microsoft Teams Room. Var det ett utmanande projekt?
Det er et veldig kult prosjekt egentlig, fordi vi måtte håndtere mange elementer, både i forhold til planlegging av nettverk, i forhold til hvordan det her skulle se ut. Og Jan Ketil, du brukte jo masse tid på å forberede det her og teste. Kan ikke du fortelle litt om det også?
Jo, altså den største utfordringen var jo å få til en deployment-løsning da, som virka hver gang, og virka på en sånn måte at det skulle være sømløst og enkelt da, for IT-teknikere ute på de forskjellige lokasjonene og få deploya selve møterommet. Og det var ikke bare å ta deployment-koden som var fra Microsoft, for det måtte vi da modifisere en god del for å få til å løse de behovene og de ønskene vi hadde.
Enkelt är uppskattat av alla IT-tekniker och kanske även av de som ska betala för i slutändan. Så det är ju jättebra. Jag såg att du använde SCCM för att rulla ut de här. Är det inte så att de här rummen kom färdiginstallerade med Windows och all programvara? Behöver man använda en sån programvara som SCCM för att rulla ut det, eller?
Altså i utgangspunktet så kan du jo selvfølgelig ta et møterom og bare plugge det i veggen og logge på med en brukernavn og et passord. Men tanken er at du skal ha en løsning da, som med en zero touch, hvor du kan deploye et rom i hvilken som helst lokasjon i hele verden, uten at de som er til stede i det rommet hverken har kjennskap til brukernavn eller passord på dette enheten. I tillegg så ønsker vi å få dem en rolle inn i management. Vi ønsker å få på ekstra software på disse enhetene for eksempel Logitech Rally. Og nå fikk vi da en unison måte å deploye dette på. Og ja, vi bruker Configuration Manager, det er helt riktig. Og det er den eneste supporterte måten å deploye møterom at scale fremdeles i dag.
Att rulla ut mötesrum nu när alla jobbar hemma, är det riktigt rätt? Eller hur ska man tänka där? Ska man förbereda det nu och göra det, eller hur tänkte er kunder?
Ja, det er det som er viktig da, at man planlegger for de hybride møtene, at det er en god opplevelse når folk kommer tilbake til kontoret igjen. Fordi den nye normalen, tror vi da, og kundene i det tilfellet her, vil være at noen vil være via en digital komponent, at kanskje alle møter vil ha en digital komponent, og da være forberedt på det når man kommer tilbake, kjempeviktig. At man kan bli med via mobil, man kan bli med fra der man og jeg tror også at man vil kanskje tenke litt mer over tida si fremover, og kanskje ikke reise til kontoret hver eneste dag, bare for å være med i noen møter. Så kjempeviktig å tilrettelegge for det i møterommene i organisasjoner i dag.
Ja. Hur har ni gjort under det här projektet? Ni antar att ni också jobbar hemma. Har ni fyllt upp vardagsrum och barnens rum med MTR-enheter, eller hur har det fungerat?
Nei, jeg har jo hatt fikk tilsett et møterom fra kunden, og jeg brukte det ene møterommet, for det samme hardwaren på alle rommene. Så jeg brukte det ene møterommet, satt opp lab her hjemme, og satt og testdeploya møterommet her på kontoret mitt, rett bak meg her faktisk. Og så har jeg bare sendt over koden via GitHub faktisk, delt kode med kunden via GitHub, og da har de bare implementert det her da i produksjon.
Ja, när kunden skulle rulla ut det här, det finns ju väldigt många tillverkare av de här MTR-systemen. Hjälpte ni till dem att välja de här systemen, vad som skulle vara, och vet ni hur de tänkte där? Hur kom de fram till just där? För de har gått på en hårdvara, eller hur har det varit?
Ja, de har valgt en hårdvare, og hovedgrunnen til dette var at det var en av de få som faktisk fullt supporterer det de kaller for IT Pro Builds, at du kan deploye rommet selv. Det ikke alle MTR-hardware-leverandørene som supporterer det. Så hvis du da begynner å deploye det selv, så sier de, ja, det fint, det kan du gjøre, men det ikke noe vi i utgangspunktet supporterer. Mens den leverandøren kun her valgte, de supporterer dette fullt ut da. Det var en av grunnene også.
Är det något mer man bör tänka på när man väljer de här systemen? Är det några tips där?
Nei, det som viktig jo at man, altså det jo et veldig generisk produkt. Alle har jo sine fordeler og spesialiteter. Men utifra det, så om man skal deploye, så må man sjekke at det støtter å komme med 90 Pro Build, som Jan Ketil kaller det. Men ellers så det mix and match, så lenge det certified for Teams. Så det da en viss standard på både hardwaren og potensialet med løsninger også. Så det det aller viktigste.
Ja, det där med certifiering är viktigt, så allting passar ihop. På de här jag har hört en del kunder som när de har kollat in på de här, så finns det lokala konton. Det finns 2 stycken lokala konton i Windows på de här systemen. Kan det vara någon säkerhetsrisk? Hur ska man tänka där?
Når du har deployet et sånt rom, så det bare en lokal konto som ligger igjen, og det Skype-kontoen. Som jeg også nevnte for så vidt i sesjonen forrige. Fordi den lokale administratorkontoen, eller admin-kontoen, den blir fjernet av MTR-en i seg selv etter ved midnatt første døgn, så blir admin-kontoen fjernet. Mens den Skype-kontoen, den ligger der og logger på lokalt, og kan egentlig ikke gjøre mer enn det å logge på lokalt. Så det da det jo dette en nedlåst device med masse local group policy som kontrollerer hva denne Skype-brukeren kan gjøre. Så det eneste den Skype-brukeren kan gjøre, det å starte Teams-appen. That's it.
Så det bör inte vara någon säkerhetsrisk där. Det kan man säga till säkerhetsavdelingen att det här är nedlåst.
Ja, det var jo en av grunnene til at vi valgte faktisk å gå cloud- og Intune-veien da, kontra å gå domeneveien. Og at de hadde en policy i domenet om at lokale kontoer ikke har lov å logge på. Så vi kunne ikke bruke de group policyene som fantes inne i domenet deres i dag. Og i stedet for å ha en lang løp med det, så sier vi ok, vi skiller dem ut av nettet, vi lager dem til cloud-devicer, og da kan vi da lage denne Skype-kontoen til å logge på lokalt.
Ståle, du visar lite där att det finns den här standardlicensen och det finns premiumlicensen. Och premiumlicensen där är ju Microsoft som hjälper till att hantera och övervaka de här enheterna. Om man inte vill satsa på den, vad tycker du? Räcker Teams Admin Center eller saknar man någonting där?
Ja, så det jo, per i dag så det ganske stor forskjell på hva du får av rapportering når du velger den premium-lisensen, for der har Microsoft laget en del views, og kanskje det beste viewet jeg liker ved den premium-lisensen, at du ser utilization av møterommet. Du kan gå inn og se hvor mange møter møterommet har vært med i, og man kan bruke det for return of investment. Det litt vanskeligere å se i Teams admin-senteret på samme måte. Og ellers så har man jo en viss oversikt over hardware og så videre, men der valgte vi også å kombinere med Azure monitorering, som Jan Ketil kan snakke litt mer om.
Ja, altså et av de store manglene i Teams admin-senteret i dag jo at du for eksempel ikke kan sette opp alerting. Så du kan ikke lage noen alarmer. Så når du har 1500 rom rundt omkring i verden, så det litt viktig at man får beskjed hvis et rom slutter å virke. Et rom begynner å få bluescreen, eller kameraet disconnectet, den type ting, at noen har plugget en kabel, så trenger de som sitter på IT å få beskjed om dette, før på en måte noen kommer inn og skal bare kjøre et møte, og så virker ikke rommet. Det ikke logget på, for eksempel. Mistet nettverksforbindelse. Så det å få på plass den monitorering og alarmeringen vi får i Azure Monitor, det det som gjør at vi kan på en måte være trygge på at vi, i den skalaen som her, at vi har oversikt over tilstand på alle rommene. Og det får du ikke med Teams admin-senter i dag, dessverre.
Men for dem som drifter rommene day to day, synes det var veldig nyttig å få det inn i Teams admin-senteret. Får en litt sånn oversikt at a glance, kan gå inn og se litt på rommene, det veldig visuelt flott. Og så vil det jo komme mer og mer funksjonalitet i Teams admin-senteret også, så vi gleder oss å se hva Microsoft kommer med i fremtiden.
Ja, det kan være interessant at det kommer litt API-er, kanskje om man kan bygge kanske någon Power BI-rapport eller kopplat till flows eller det skulle bli intressant att se. Du bevisar en viktig grej där med guest join om man ska in Cisco och Zoom-möten om det är någon som använder sig av de tjänsterna. Då måste man ändra lite på mailboxen där. Kan det vara någon säkerhetsrisk att externa får bjuda in de här rummen?
Det absolutt noe man bør vurdere om OK. Det betyr jo i praksis at eksterne kan booke møterommet ditt. Men de kan jo ikke ta over møterommet ditt eller i noen form for manipulere det. Så det handler egentlig bare om en upraktisk sak i så fall. Men det det som må til hvis man ønsker å bli invitert av eksterne inn i Zoom og WebEx-møter. Jeg vil anta at når man bruker guest join, at det det man ønsker, så det viktig å være klar over at et møterom fra Exchange-perspektiv automatisk blokkerer eksterne meeting invites. Og det som jeg sa i sesjonen også, at selv om du forwarder møteinvitasjon, så vil det være den eksterne som gjør selve invitasjonen. Alternativet jo da at man blir invitert som person, til et Zoom-møte, og så sier man, hei, jeg skal være med i det Teams-møtet, med det Teams-rommet her i tillegg. Da må den personen lage en ny invitasjon og booke møte selv med den linken, og så vil Teams-rommet tolke det som et Zoom-møte eller WebEx-møte, eller for så vidt Teams-møte også. Så det jo et alternativ, men det hadde litt mer prosess rundt det.
Det här var ett stort projekt. Om ni ska göra det en gång till nu, vad det första ni kommer förändra? Vad kommer ni lägga till i den här processen?
Jeg vet du hva, vi har gjort det her før, så jeg føler den prosessen vi hadde var veldig bra. Men det vi ville legge mer trykk på å samle, altså den innsamlingen av informasjon om nettverket vil vi legge enda mer trykk på i starten, fordi det tok veldig lang tid. Og fordi det vi må gjøre å kartlegge alle subnettene, bygge opp informasjon om det, legge det inn i call quality-dashbordet, som gjør da at vi klarer å identifisere rommene som interne rom. Fordi som standard ser man jo alle eksterne, fordi at alle er eksterne til Microsoft 365 og Teams. Og det også i forhold til planleggingen, også Network Planner, som vi brukte veldig mye for å vite at vi har nok båndbredde, i hvert fall teoretisk, på lokasjonene og så videre, for det brukte vi veldig, veldig lang tid på. Jeg tror faktisk vi brukte 6 måneder på å hente inn all informasjon. Så, fordi det litt sånn forskjellig informasjon som ligger der ute, det ikke alle kunder som har fullstendig oversikt over nettverkene sine og byggene og så videre. Så det ville vi ha lagt mer trykk på. Men ellers prosessen synes vi fungerte veldig bra. Det som viktig å forstå at det å implementere Teams Room, hvis du skal gjøre det helt riktig, så er det jo ikke en person som innehar all den kompetansen, og det har jo vi vist i det prosjektet her, hvor Jan Ketil, som kommer fra Enterprise Mobility-siden, deployment, Intune, management, sikkerhet, hadde en veldig stor rolle i forhold til utrullinga, samt at vi måtte også planlegge det her som på en vanlig Teams-måte, da, med håndtere nettverk, kontoene og brukerne og lisenser, sørge for at alt sammen henger sammen i forhold till bruken av det här också.
Jättebra. Tack så mycket för att ni ville vara med. Nu är dagen nästan slut här och jag ska ta in Amanda och Theodora och Mårten här i studion och så kommer vi göra en avslutning alldeles strax. Tack så mycket båda två att ni vill vara med och vi ses vid nästa Teamsdag kanske. Tack så mycket.
Ja. Hej då.
Hej.
Hej då!